There have been 221 school shootings in America since 2013, and the rate of mass shootings has tripled since 2011, which brings a new question to rise. How should our teachers be armed in schools? I know when you first hear the word guns, you think danger and the violence it comes from, but they actually can be used for something good. The thought of guns scares people because all you see on the media are the bad things, like the killings in London or France or wherever. But so try and keep an open mind about what I'm going to talk about, because it could possibly change your mind. And if it's talking about the safety of children, I think it's something we should think about. First thing I'm going to talk about is ambulance reaction time. On average, it takes an ambulance 10 minutes to respond to an emergency call. So for 10 minutes, a shooter can come in and you have to learn to defend yourself. But how do you do it without a gun? You think of when you're in a classroom, what are you going to use to defend yourself? A chair, a pencil? You don't have anything that's going to compare to an AK-47 or another assault rifle. In 10 minutes, the routine you're supposed to do is lock the door and everybody sit in the corner quietly. But in 10 minutes, a shooter could come down with an AK-47 and it could shoot 600 rounds in a minute. With about 22 kids and sitting in one spot, it would only take 1 minute to wound all those kids in that corner. So you have to learn how to defend yourself. But how can someone defend a shooter with an AK-47 or any other assault rifle? So that's why I think we should have our teachers armed, because if a shooter walked through the door with an AK-47 and they had a gun locked away, all they would have to do was fire. Steve Saboyd wrote on an article called "Every Teacher Should Have a Gun" on the TND website. He wrote, "Just this week, outside Atlanta, Michael Brandon Hill allegedly walked into Ronald E. McClare Discovery Learning Academy with an AK-47 and enough ammunition to take out half the school. Luckily, Antoinette Tuff, who works in the front office of the school, was able to talk Hill down. But what would happen if she wasn't able to talk him down? You probably didn't hear much about that because it was used the correct way and there wasn't any violence or anything because they stopped it. But if she wouldn't have stopped it, he had all that ammunition and none of those teachers would have been able to defend themselves. So most of the time, guns are portrayed as the enemy because they are harm. But so can a pencil or a chair. They can all be used to harm someone. But if they're used the right way, they can help to control other things that law enforcement can't do when they're not on the scene. Second is school security is very low. On everytownresearch.org, someone wrote an article called "Analysts of School Shootings." They wrote of shootings perpetrated by minors at primary and secondary schools, and for which the source of the firearm was known. More than half of the kids obtained the gun at home, likely because an adult did not store it locked and unloaded. This discusses that in shootings, when the student is the shooter, they get that gun from home. But how are we going to know if they had that gun? How are we going to know if they bring it to school? So how do we know if we should have a gun in school or not? So why not prepare early? In most schools like mine, we do not have bag checks at the beginning when you walk through the door, and we don't have metal detectors to check. So what are you supposed to do? Some schools aren't even lucky to have a school cop that walks through the schools during the day. So what are schools supposed to do? The teacher is supposed to do anything that can stop them except for their words. So how do we know if they're carrying a gun or a small handgun? So if a gun was once again in their desk and a student had pulled out a gun, they'd easily be able to have access to that gun. Lastly is to make kids feel safer. As a student in a high school, I feel like if a shooter was to come into my school right now, I would not feel protected. Once again, the reference that all we do is we lock the door and we sit in the corner, but that's not going to protect us when a shooter comes through. So what do we do when the shooter breaks in? Do we ask nicely, "Please don't shoot me with your gun pointed straight at us"? Or do we just defend ourselves with a gun? We have to stop being the victim and start defending ourselves for the worst. Some teachers at our school have bats or golf clubs in their room, and personally, I would want to be in that room if there was a shooter that came through our school. If I'm going to be spending 8 hours a day, 5 times a week in a school, I should at least feel like I'm being protected if the worst was happening. Lewis Howes on the Tennessean wrote an article called "Armed Teachers to Keep Schools Safe in School Shootings." He wrote, "At Cinnamon, Colorado, a high school shooting was held down to 1 death, all because of an armed school resource officer was at the scene in about a minute and a half." Sensible gun control really means having armed guards on site or more armed civilians available. So arm the teachers. I also feel like that a shooter would not want to come to school with a gun knowing that we all have a gun. If you would know that you're walking into school where it's going to be defended, that you could possibly get shot, are you going to come into that school with a gun? I just don't think I would do that. So, in conclusion, I strongly believe that having armed teachers is the right decision. Of course, there are also the cons and the pros, like maybe if teachers had a gun, it would make a kid want to come to school, or it could make other students feel unsafe, or any other reason. Guns can be used to harm us or help us, and if it was going to be used to protect me from someone who was trying to hurt me, I mean, I'm all for it. So while school shootings are on the rise, this is definitely something that we should be thinking about. And this has already came into effect in Texas, and it's already worked out. They stopped, I think, 2 school shootings in Texas. I hope this could get your thinking, maybe, or change your mind. If so, help me make the change to my peers and make me feel safe. Thank you.